It's just gone past 10 o'clock. And we're going to start from the Mishnah on Daf Hey Amud Aleph. That's in the article, it's 5A2. And here goes. Unless there are any questions from the share from yesterday, I'm happy to pick up any of those. But otherwise, I think we're going to get started. Okay. All right. Here goes. It says the Heilige Mishnah. We said in the previous Mishnah that what? That you read Megillah on these days, right? On the 14th of Adar. And if you have cities that they don't have, they're like villages, and so they're smaller, and they don't have Asara Batlanim, they don't have these 10 Batlanim. So we said that we bring it earlier to the Makdima. So we want to know what's considered to be an Iyar Gedola and what's considered to be not an Iyar Gedola. So says the Mishnah, Eze Iyar Gedola, what is considered a large town? Kol sheyesh bo asara batlanim. Any town that has 10 unoccupied men that they can come to the minyan in shul at all times. If you have less than that, then it's considered to be a kfar, which means to say that our criteria for considering you to be a large town is if you have 10 batlanim, 10 unoccupied men that are free from having to work. They don't have to work, but their occupation is to come to the shul and to daven and to learn. So then you can be considered that a Gedolah, and therefore the leniency to bring it earlier does not apply. But if you don't have 10 batlanim, it doesn't matter how big the city is. Nevertheless, you are eligible to come in earlier to hear the Megillah earlier. Says the Mishnah next. Regarding these times of Megillah reading, that the sages said that at times we advance the mitzvah to observe it a day earlier, but we do not postpone it to a day later, right? In other words, when we talk about making this leniency, it's always with regards to bringing it earlier, never about making it later. However, the time of the wood offering of the Kohanim, this refers to a story about how in the time of the Beis Hamikdash there was a major shortage of wood, and there were I think 8 families that came along, and they provided from their own private wood for the Mizbeach, and as a result of that, it was established that they would always have a right to be able to bring wood to the Mizbeach, and if they would donate wood, then at that time, even if the Beis Hamikdash had wood, they wouldn't use their own wood, they would use the wood of these particular families, and each one of these families were given their time, their fixed time each year, that they would be given the honor of bringing the wood, and together with bringing the wood, they would bring up their Mizbeach. So now what happens if this would fall? Yes.
How did we get from size of towns to the Beit HaMikdash?
That's an excellent question, because what we're discussing here is whether we make the day earlier or whether we postpone it to later. Okay, so we're saying with regards to making a difference when your day of reading the Megillah should be on the 14th, there are times where you bring it earlier. Now we're going to bring examples of things that when you can't do it on its own day, we're going to say, don't make it earlier, make it later, in contrast to the halach with the Megillah.
Yeah.
So the first example is the Atzia Kohanim. So if they couldn't bring up the carbon that they would usually bring up together with bringing the wood for the Mizbeach, because, for example, it was on Shabbos, so then they would not bring that carbon earlier. They would bring it after. They would bring it after Shabbos. But Tisha B'Av, likewise, Tisha B'Av, we don't bring it earlier. We make it later. And Chagiga, likewise with the Chagiga offering, which everybody was obligated to bring when they came 3 times a year to Yerushalayim. When they would come to the Beis Hamikdash, they would have to bring the Chagiga offering. So if it fell out on Shabbos, you would have to postpone it to after. You would never bring it before the Hakel, and so too Hakel. This year is a year of Hakel. The year after Shemitah is what's considered to be the 8th year, the year of Hakel. And what they would do is on the Yom Tov of Sukkot, the first day of Chol HaMoed, they would gather everybody together, and the king would read from the Torah. So this was postponed if it fell out on Shabbos. It was never brought earlier. It was always pushed off to later. So, with regards to all of these, says the Mishnah, that these are going to be postponed at times, but they're not going to be advanced to an earlier time. Okay, so that's the difference between Megillah and all these other things, where if for whatever reason on the fixed time you cannot bring up these karbanos or make the hakel or have the fast, etc., you don't bring it early like you do with the Megillah, but you postpone it to later. Says the Mishnah, even though they said that what? That we bring it earlier and we don't postpone it with regards to the Megillah reading, right? So, nevertheless, even though ordinarily, when it comes to the Yom Tov of Purim, we say that you cannot engage in doing a hesped and in fasting, but if, for example, one of the villages had to come into town on the 11th, let's say, so even though they're hearing the Megillah on that day, nevertheless, they can still go and participate in a eulogy or give a eulogy, or they can have a fast on that day, even though they're reading Megillah on that same day. And one extra additional thing they add over here is that on the day that they read the Megillah, they would also include giving the gifts to the poor, as we read in the Gemara yesterday. This idea of associating the reading the Megillah with the giving the gifts for the poor on that day. So now Yehuda is going to clarify which villages can bring it earlier and which ones cannot. In other words, even though you may qualify to the first criteria that we mentioned in the Mishnah, that you have Asara Batlanim or you don't have Asara Batlanim, whether you have 10 unoccupied men or you don't have, so that's a criteria. But Rabbi Yehuda says there's another criteria. Amosai, we had this before. Amosai, when can a village which doesn't have 10 unoccupied men to come to shul all the time, so when can they bring this in earlier? When can they go into the towns earlier? It's only makim shenichnasim b'sheni u'chamishi. It's if that place had only a place where they would usually anyway go in to the towns on Monday and Thursday to have all their things taken care of with the Bezdin. If it's a place where they don't enter the towns, not on Monday or Thursday, is then for these people, they cannot read it on any other time than the day itself, the Yudal Adar, because they're not usually going in to town anyway on Monday and Thursday. So whatever day they're going to have to go in, it's going to be a tircha for them. It's going to be an extra burden. They're going to have to go in. They're not going in anyway. So for them, if you're anyway going to go in, and it doesn't make a difference what day you're going to go in, so you might as well go in on the day that everybody's reading, which is on the 14th. Okay? That is the end of the Mishnah. Okay? Everybody clear on the Mishnah? So far, so good. All right. So now, the Gemara says as follows, right? Tana was taught in the Brisa, Asara Batlonim, Beis HaKnesses, 10 unoccupied men of the Beis HaKnesses, which means to say as follows. You could understand that Asara Batlonim could be people who are unoccupied. It's like a koilo, right? When it comes to a koilo, right? What's a koilo? Koilo is people who are paid money to sit and learn, and they sit and learn and they study, and so they're unoccupied men. Here, the Bryce is coming along to tell us what kind of Asara Batlanim we're talking about. If you look in Rashi, Rashi says Asara Batlanim Shebebeis HaKnesses that are in the synagogue, Shehem B'Teilim B'Melachton, they are sitting idle, not doing any work. V'Nizaynim Mishal Tzibor, they are being sustained. They're being paid by the community. Kedei, in order at least to be present B'Tfilah B'Beis HaKnesses, for davening in the Beis HaKnesses. The Amamar, because we've learned before in Masechtas Brachos, given Shema Kadosh Baruch Hu Beis HaKnesses, Hashem comes and he comes to the shul. If he doesn't find 10 people, Hashem's upset. Hashem says, "What's this? I've come and there's no one here. There's no one answer. Well, what is this coming to a shul and there's no one there?" And so, therefore, there were communities that were affluent enough to be able to pay people so that they wouldn't have to go and work, so that they would always be available in shul, so they would always be able to have a minyan. So we're saying that's what it means when we say Asara Batlanim. Okay? All right. Now, going to what we said in our Mishnah, Be'elu Amru, Makdim V'Leim Achrin, we're on Daf Hey Amud Aleph. Okay? So just after the Mishnah. So regarding to these times, the Chachamim said that we advance, but we don't postpone. Frank the Gemara, my timer, what's the reason why we only bring it earlier? We'd never make it later. Reb Abba says in the name of Shmuel. It says in the pasuk V'Layavar. We already had this. That since it says in the Megillah that these are the things that were established, and it says V'Layavar, it will never pass. So although it means literally V'Layavar, it will not pass, which means that this will always be a custom by the Jewish people. But nevertheless, we learn from this word also that we do not go past the 15th day of Adar. That's why we don't make it earlier. Another citing of Reb Abba in the name of Reb Abba Shmuel. Where do we know that we do not count days to calculate years? In other words, as Rashi points out, this is talking about with regards to somebody who makes a shavua, right? If a person makes a promise that I am going to sustain myself, I'm going to refrain from drinking wine, right? For example, for a year. So we count from that day until a year later. Okay? So now, the thing is like this. When it comes to years, right? Sometimes we have, less days in a certain year, right? So let's read it. Let's read it in Rashi. Let's read it together in Rashi. Kagain, for example, the Omar Kedem Yain. Somebody says, "I'm making a shavua that I'm not going to have any wine." Ani Kedem Yain she'eni toyim l'shana. I'm not going to have any. I'm not going to have any wine for a year. Maida, he begins to count Yud Beis Chodashim, 12 months, miyayim l'yayim, from day to day, right? So if it's, let's say, today's what? Today is the 19th of Iyar. So if a person says that from today, a year, so we're going to count 12 months until the 19th of Iyar, the following year. Also, he gives an example. If, for example, a person made a shavua, a promise, on the first day of Nisan, so also it's forbidden for him until the first of Nisan that comes. Even though Shadain Yesh, there still is Yud Aleph Yoim, 11 days. That the year of the sun, meaning the solar year, is longer than the lunar year. Sometimes we make months which are less, which means to say instead of having 30 days, we'll have 29 days. Nevertheless, Reb Abba is coming to teach us that when it comes to counting, right, a year, we count months, we don't count days, okay? we count 12 months, we don't count the days, which means to say we're not particular about the unit of days, which means as follows. You have
Rabbi,
a bunch of units. Yes.
Yeah. What happens if you're going from chaser to malay in terms of months, or merubah, going from regular year to
Right.
merubah? So then you have a problem. If you were to count months,
Right.
it would be a problem. So counting days from 1st of Nisan, understood.
Right.
But you can't count 12 months because you'd miss it.
In a case of a year that has 13 months, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I thought about this, but I didn't look into it further. I would say that you include the 13th month, and that would be the full year, because it's from chodesh to chodesh, and because because that year is. Oh, but the question is, if they hadn't decided it when you took on the Shavua, then the question is, if a person takes on the Shavua, that they're not going to have wine for a year, and they had in mind that means 12 months, and then all of a sudden in the month of Adar, the best din came along and said, we're going to add another month. So then does he have to wait till Nisan? So I would say not. I would say a year is 12 months. I would say a year is 12 months. But that's not the point here of what the Gemara is saying. Your question is still valid, but the point here that the Gemara is trying to teach us is that there are different units. You have a unit of years, you have a unit of months, you have a unit of days, you have a unit of hours, right? And then minutes. So we say when we are trying to calculate a year, we only go to the next unit, which is months. We don't go down to the unit after that, which is days, okay? You count months to calculate a year, but you don't count days to calculate the years. And so therefore, so long as it's called a month, that's going to be the end of the 12 months. Even if there are some days that are extra here and extra there, that won't matter. Once it comes to the first day of Nisan, that would conclude. With regards to a year of 13 months, I'm going to look into it a little bit further, but yeah, that's all I have to offer at the moment. Okay, so now the rabbis of Caesarea, said in the name of, it seems like the same Reb Abba. From where do we know that we don't reckon hours to calculate months, right? So this is the same idea. We went from years to months. Now we're going from months to hours. Yep.
Then minutes.
Sorry. We're going from months to days, and not to hours. So he says, how do we know this? So we know this from the story that took place when the Yidden asked for meat. So it says that they will have up to a month of days, which teaches me that when it comes to counting a month, it's only yomim atam chashim. It is only that you reckon days to calculate the months. You do not reckon hours to calculate the months. Let me see something. So Rashi gives an example. It's a helpful example. For example, somebody comes along to his wife and he says the following. He says, here's your get. But he does it with a condition. In other words, the get is only going to be valid once the condition is fulfilled. And what's the condition? He says the condition is if I haven't come back here until a month, until this month. And the month ended up being a month which is not full, which means 29 days. And then if he comes once it's already gotten dark after the 29th day, right? So we don't say that he's come while it's still in the Chodesh Sharei, since the the chodesh of the lunar is 29 days and a half, and since we don't count the hours, so therefore he's come too late. I think come too late. Does that make sense? 1 second. Yeah, he's come too late because after the 29 days, that's it. That's when it's over and the month is over, and so the get is a valid get, and he cannot claim that he's come back in time. But what we see from the pasuk is that when it comes to calculating the month, we go according to days, and we don't start calculating the hours as well. Okay. We had said in our Mishnah, Avol, Zman, Atzei Kohanim, V'Tisha B'Av, V'Chagiga, V'Hakel, Ma'achrin V'Lemakdimin. That these are the different things that we would not bring earlier, but rather we would postpone, and they are the times of the Kohanim who would bring the wood for the Mizbeach and bring their carbon, Tisha B'Av, and we said bringing up the carbon Chagiga and the celebration of Hakel. All of these things we postpone. So now the Gemara wants to come along and explore these things. Tisha B'Av, we're not going in order necessarily. Tisha B'Av, when it comes to the fast of Tisha B'Av, it's not advanced, right? But rather we postpone it. Because we don't want to advance the commemorating of a calamity. And plus one could say that, Mashiach's going to come. And so therefore, why celebrate or commemorate a calamity when you may not have a need for it? But the point here is that we don't advance something like that forward. If anything, we postpone it. Chagiga v'Hakel. What's the reason for Chagiga and Hakel that we don't advance it, but we postpone it? So Nashum is because the Akatin lemotos man chiyuvayu, because their time of their obligation has not yet arrived. So if you were going to come along and arrive to Yerushalayim well in advance of Sukkot, for example, right? So now that it's Erev Sukkot, and tomorrow on Sukkot it's going to be Shabbos, and I can't bring the carbon, so let me bring up my carbon now. I say, no, you can't bring up your carbon now. You know why? Because it's not Sukkot, and you can't bring up your carbon if it's not Sukkot, right? And the same thing is with Hakel. There's a specific day that Hakel is supposed to take place. You can't bring it earlier because the obligation hasn't yet come. Okay. So now we're going to bring a very enigmatic brisa, which is hard to decipher. Tana, sort of the brisa Chagiga, Chozman Chagiga Ma'achrin, that we can postpone the Chagiga offering and all the time of the Chagiga offering. Says the Gemara immediately, Bish Laima Chagiga. The statement that you said about the Chagiga itself, right? So that statement I understand, right? The Mikla b'Shabbos, Machrina Levasa Shabbata. Because if the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, we postpone the Chagiga to after Shabbos. That's fine. That I understand. But Elasman Chagiga Mahi. What does this mean when you say that V'chol Zman Chagiga, that you postpone Chol Zman Chagiga? What does that mean? The time of the Chagiga offering. What does that mean? So we're going to offer a number of possible solutions to what this could possibly mean. So here's the first one. Amar Rav Oshia. Rav Oshia said, Amar, this is what it means. It means as follows. Chagiga b'Shabbos v'oilas re'iyah afilu b'Yom Tov. When it comes to the Chagiga offering, which the Chagiga offering was what? Was a shlamim. And a shlamim, we say that you can, according to some, you can bring a Chagiga offering on Yom Tov. Why can you bring a Chagiga on Yom Tov? Because there's something called Eichel Nefesh, and on Yom Tov, there's no problem to prepare, to slaughter and prepare an animal for the purpose of you eating it. Whereas when it comes to an Oilah, where the person himself, the owner of the animal, would not come to eat any of the Oilah, it would be completely offered up on the Mizbeach. So there's no Eichel Nefesh. So we're saying like this: Chagiga b'Shabbos, when you want to bring a chagiga, but it's on Shabbos, and when you want to bring up an oila re'iyah, I feel it be Yom Tov, even if it on Yom Tov. So we say that this man chagiga ma'acharin, that the chagiga offering, that falls on the Shabbos, right? We postpone it. In other words, like this: even if the appropriate time for bringing the chagiga and the appropriate time for bringing the re'iyah is on that day, because it's the 15th day of Sukkot, of Tishrei, for example, but because it fell out of Shabbos, we postpone it. We postpone the day. So that's what it means. In other words, even anything that is its proper time, but because it fell out on Shabbos, we postpone it. That's what Rabbi Oshia is suggesting is the meaning of those words, man chagiga, meaning it's the appropriate time for the chagiga. Nevertheless, we postpone it. Okay? Money, according to Rabbi Oshia's explanation, that what it's coming to tell me is that when the chagiga, when Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, that we postpone it even though it's the right time. Who does that go according to? Now, those who have a good memory will know that we discussed this in the Masechta of Chagiga. We had a whole discussion whether or not you can do smicha on the carbon, right? If it falls out on Yom Tov, and what do we do when it falls out on Shabbos? And we had a whole discussion about Yom Tavayach, the day when they would bring up all the sacrifices after Yom Tov if it fell out on Shabbos and so on, right? So he says, Mani, who's the Tana according to Rabbi Yishua's explanation? He says, Beis Shammai. It's going to be Beis Shammai. Why Beis Shammai? The Tana, because we learned in the Mishnah, this is actually a Mishnah in Beitzah, but we referenced it in Maseches Chagiga when we learned it. It says, Beis Shammai says, Mevi'in Shlamim b'Yom Tov, you can bring a carbon Shlamim on Yom Tov, ve'in Seimchin Aleim, and you cannot lean on them, because we said that is a rabbinic prohibition to be able to lean on a carbon, because on an animal, because you might come to ride it. And so therefore, according to Beis Shammai, what you could do is you could do the smicha the day before, because it doesn't have to be right at the time of bringing it up. So you have the option to do the smicha erev Yom Tov, and you'll bring up the carbon, the shlamim, which means the chagiga. You bring it up on Yom Tov itself. But he says you cannot bring up oilais, right? And Beis Hillel says, we may bring up shlamim offerings and oila offerings, and you can lean on them. Okay, so this is with regards to Yom Tov, right? So, but what we see from here is that it's Beis Shammai who has the opinion that you're not allowed to bring up an oila on Yom Tov. So when Rabbi Oshia says that the meaning of this brisa is that only when Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, that's when you cannot bring up the shlamim, the chagiga. And with regards to the oilas re'iyah, even on Yom Tov, you have to postpone it. That fits very well with who? With Beis Shammai. Okay, that fits with the view of Beis Shammai. So that is the interpretation of this brisa according to Rabbi Oshia. Now we're going to move on to an alternative interpretation of this brisa that says that that the chagiga and all the time of the chagiga is postponed. Rava says chagiga, the brisa means that the festival offering calls the man chagiga ma'achrin. They be postponed for the entire time of the festival, but tefei but not more than the time of the festival, which means to say what this price is coming to tell you is that when it falls out on Shabbos and you cannot bring up the carbon and you're going to have to postpone it, how long can you postpone it for? It's only kozman chagiga, only for the duration of the rest of the Yom Tov till the end of Sukkot, but not more than that. It's not, as we learned in the Mishnah, somebody didn't bring up their carbon on the first day of Yom Tov, so he has ability to come and fulfill that obligation. He can offer up these offerings throughout the Yom Tov. And it says, he can even do it on the last day of Yom Tov, which refers to the Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres. And we had this whole discussion when we learned Maseches Chagiga, that even though Shmini Atzeres and Sukkos are considered to be different Yom Tovim with regards to certain matters relating to the different Yom Tovim, but with regards to the Korban Chagiga and being able to make up for not having brought it on the first day, Shmini Atzeres is included. But now, Avar Haregel, if the Yom Tov has passed, meaning Shmini Atzeres also passed, and you didn't bring up the carbonis that you were mechuyev to bring up for the Yom Tov, he's no longer responsible for it, which means to say, not that he's not responsible, but that he can't make it up anymore. It's finished. It's passed. If you bring up a carbon now, it's not going to count as the carbonis that you had to bring up on Sukkos. So that's how he understands what it means. Kol Zman Chagiga. That's those words of the Brisa.
But
Okay,
Rabbi,
that's the second. Yeah.
What would be the reason that he couldn't do it on Shmini Atzeret? Is it his
reason
fault,
why,
or is it the fault of the Beit HaMikdash crew that couldn't do it?
Oh, you're saying what happens if it passed and he didn't do it? We're saying it was his responsibility to do it, and he didn't do it. There's a very important principle that
So
we
he
have in
didn't
Torah.
bring it. He didn't bring it in time, is what you're saying.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, it's not that they couldn't do it. He didn't bring it in time.
He didn't bring it in time, but there's this concept of if a person tchilasai b'pshia v'sefer ba'enes, then he's chayav. If a person he begins by being negligent, and then afterwards it becomes out of his hands, then that's that we fault him on. You shouldn't have been negligent to begin with, right? So even if in the end, when it came to Shmini Atzeres, there wasn't enough time, for example, for them to bring up his carbon, he should have brought it earlier. Yes, if you did bring it on Shmini Atzeres, then you fulfilled your obligation. But once that time passed, it's passed, finished. Okay. Rav Ashi Omar, another explanation of this brisa. So Rav Ashi says as follows: The brisa means chagiga, b'chol zman chagiga ma'achrin, that the festival offering is postponed any time the festival offering is spoken of. Va'afilu atzeres d'chad yema ma'achrin. That means even in the case of Shavuos, which is only a one-day Yom Tov, it is postponed, and you have the days afterwards to be able to bring it up, as we learn about the Yom Tovayach. The Tanakh, as we learned in a Mishnah, Moedim, she'im chol atzeres lias b'Shabbos, Beis Hillel. We had this in Chagiga when we learned it, right? It says that Beis Hillel admitted to Beis Shammai, right? They both agreed that if chol atzeres lias b'Shabbos, that if Shavuos fell out on Shabbos, when no one can bring up the carbon chagiga, the day of slaughtering, meaning bringing up the festival offerings, is after Shabbos, and that's how Rav Ashi understands chagiga, v'chol zman chagiga, meaning it comes to include even Shavuos. That even though Shavuos is only one day, so whereas Pesach and Sukkot are 7 days, or Sukkot is 8 days, that you have they're considered to be Chag, and where Shavuos there's only 1 day of the Chag. Nevertheless, this teaches me that even Shavuos is included to be able to bring up the Chagiga if it fell out on Shabbos the day after. Okay. Once we are already talking about postponing the observance of Tisha B'Av, says the Gemara as follows: Amar Reb Elazar, Amar Reb Chanina. Reb Elazar said in the name of Reb Chanina that he heard the following: that Rabbi Nota Netiya B'Purim. Rabbi, right? What he did on Purim is he planted a shoot. He planted this kind of a tree on Purim. Now, in order to understand what the big deal is you have to understand that to begin with, there was a discussion whether or not Purim should be forbidden in Melacha like any other Yom Tov, right? we know that there are two major rabbinic festivals. One is Hanukkah and the other is Purim. With regards to Purim, right, there was a discussion, maybe we should make it like a Yom Tov, like all the other Yom Tovim, and that you shouldn't be able to do any malacha on it. So now, when we say that Rebbe planted a shoot, it's a big wonder, how could he do that? How could he plant a shoot on Purim? Isn't it asur b'malacha? Isn't it forbidden to do malacha on the Yom Tov of Purim? And here we go over to Daf Hey Amud Beis. Okay, the next interesting thing that we see that Rebbe did, which raised some eyebrows, was V'rachat b'kreina shel Tzipori b'shiva asa b'Tammuz. He bathed on the market day of Tzipori on the 17th of Tammuz. What this really means is he bathed the carriage. In a carriage, a kreina means a carriage, but Tosfos says it doesn't necessarily mean a carriage, but rather what it means is he did it publicly, that he bathed on Shiva Asa b'Tammuz. Now, what's the big deal about about bathing on Shiva Asa b'Tammuz? So it seems like he wanted to make a point that Shiva Asa b'Tammuz should never have the same restrictions like Tisha B'Av and like Yom Kippur do, that you're not allowed to bathe on those fast days. So therefore, he went publicly so that everybody could see that he was going to bathe on Shiva Asa b'Tammuz to teach us that. And the next thing we say over here is Obikish Laka Tisha B'Av, and he wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av. Wow, what does that mean? He wanted to abolish Tisha B'Av. The Gemara is going to explain what it means. But ultimately, the rabbis did not agree with him with regards to Tisha B'Av about uprooting the fast of Tisha B'Av. And we'll see exactly what that really means. As Rashi already says, it's referring to the additional things that he wanted to, the additional stringencies. Anyway, we'll see. Amal Lefana of Reb Abba Bar Zabta. Reb Abba Bar Zabta said to Reb Elazar, who came along and brought these reports about what Rebbe did and what he was trying and what he wanted to do, etc. And he clarified. He says, Rebbe, this wasn't the story that happened with Rebbe. In other words, he didn't want to abolish Tisha B'Av of every year. Rather, what happened was that particular year, Tisha B'Av, that year which you're reporting on was a year that Tisha B'Av fell on Shabbos, and it was postponed to after Shabbos, to Sunday. And Rebbe says, since it was postponed from its regular day, so let it be postponed altogether, and let it not be observed this year. Once it's pushed off, let it be pushed off completely. The Chachamim did not agree. The Chachamim did not agree to that. Now, there's two ways to understand what it means, that he wanted to completely postpone it. Some understand it to mean that he said that there shouldn't be a Tisha B'Av that year altogether. Others say that, no, he still didn't mind for it to be a postponed fast, but you shouldn't have all the other stringencies. Either way, that's completely different from understanding that Rebbe came along and wanted to completely uproot the whole fast of Tisha B'Av. So when Rebbe Elazar heard this from Reb Abba Bar Zabta, he turned to him, Kari Alei, he said upon him the pasuk, he says, Tovim Shnayim Min Echad, it says that two are better than one, meaning to say, it's always better to learn in a group. It's always better to learn with somebody else, so that if somebody makes a mistake, it can be corrected. Like in this case, he had made a mistake about understanding what Rebbe was intending to do, and he was corrected, and he was very pleased that he was corrected. Okay? But going back to the first thing that we had said, where we said that he planted a shoot on Purim, but Rebbe Heichen not to Purim. How could he plant a shoot on Purim? Rabbi Yosef taught a brisa that tells us that it says in the Megillah, Simcha, or Mishneh v'Yom Tov, that these days were to be established as days of gladness, days of feasting, and also a Yom Tov. So now, Simcha Malamed Shasur Behesmet. When it says the days of gladness, that teaches me that you're not allowed to eulogize for it. Mishnah, what does that teach me? Feasting, that teaches me that it's forbidden to fast. So what does Yom Tov come to teach me? Yom Tov obviously is not coming to teach me to feast because we already have that, right? It's not coming to tell me that I should be happy. We already have that. There's already explicitly. So what does Yom Tov come to teach me? So Yom Tov, so maybe Yom Tov comes along to teach us that you're not allowed to do any work. That's the teaching that Rabbi Yosef brought from a brisa. So ultimately, what comes out from this brisa from Rabbi Yosef is that you're not allowed to do any work. If that's the case, how could Rabbi plan to shoot on Yom Tov? Ella, rather, so you have to answer and say that, you know what happened? It was Rabbi Bar Abar Sehava. Rabbi lived in an unwalled city. And so therefore he observed Purim on the 14th. When was he seen planting? It was B'chamesh Sanata. He was planting on the 15th. They still called it Purim because technically it's Purim in the walled cities, but it's not that he actually planted the shoot on Purim itself, on the Purim that he was celebrating on the 14th. Frag the Gemara, Aini, is that so? That's not correct. Why? Rebbe lived in Tiberias, right? And Tiberias was surrounded by a wall in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. So therefore, when does he celebrate Purim? On the 15th. So if you tell me that this happened on the 15th, then we're back to our question, how can he do it on that day? Ella, rather, says the Gemara, the answer has to be as follows, that Rabbi Bar Chamesh Haver, it's true, Rabbi was on the 15th day, right? Because it was a walled city, so he would have to read it on the 15th day. When did he plant? It was the other way around. He actually planted on the 14th, not on the 15th. Frag the Gemara. 1 second. Was Rabbi really sure that Tiberia was surrounded by a wall from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, and therefore you observe it on the 15th? We learn about Chizkiah HaMelech that he he read it on the 14th and the 15th. Why? Why did he read it on both days? Because he had a doubt whether this was surrounded by a wall in the days of Yeshua ben Nun or not. So therefore, how can you come along and tell me that Rabbi was sure that you're supposed to read the Megillah on the 15th, and that's why he planted on the 14th, because that was important for him? And how do we know this? Because he lived in Tiberia, and that's what he did. How was he able to be so sure that he's supposed to read on the 15th? Maybe not, because we find that Chizkiah HaMelech had this question, and he wasn't able to resolve it, and therefore he read it on both days, on the 14th and the 15th. And for the Gemara, the Chizkiah Taka had a doubt. He wasn't sure. But the Rabbi was sure that it's classified as a walled city. Frag the Gemara, if so, if Rabbi was sure that it's a walled city, and therefore you read it on the 15th, Mishari, is it still allowed to plant on the 14th? V'ha doesn't it say in the Megillah's Tainus? Megillah's Tainus was something that was compiled even before the Mishnah, but it describes different laws, different halachas, and it says over there, Es Yem Arba Asa, Es Yem Chamisha Asa, that the 14th day and the 15th day, Yoimei Puriya Inon, are the days of Purim. The Lain Lemispan behind, which one should not eulogize, and this is something that seemingly doesn't need to be written in Tainus Megillah because we already have it in the Megillah's Esther itself. So why are you writing this? Why in what's called Megillah's Tainus? Why does it tell me that on the 14th and the 15th day, these are the days of Purim that you're not allowed to eulogize on them? If I know this from the Megillah, so Rava tells us this was not needed to be written. It was necessary to teach me that both people living in the walled city and people living in unwalled cities are both forbidden on both days, 14th and 15th, to eulogize, which means to say that all the restrictions that are on the 14th apply to the 15th, and all the things that apply on the 15th apply on the 14th. So it doesn't matter which, practically speaking, in our times, right? We don't say Tachnun on the 14th and the 15th. Why don't we say Tachnun on the 14th and the 15th? Because we're celebrating Purim and Shushan Purim, even though we're only reading Megillah on Purim, but we're still celebrating Shushan Purim, right? And likewise, we don't have Hespedim then either. So we're saying the question reverts back, saying even though you're establishing that Rebbe lived in Tiberia and he was sure that you read on the 15th, still there's a problem to plant on the 15th, because how could you do Malacha? Because we said that this is what? We said in the name of Rav Yosef, Bryson that he quotes, that this is Simcha Mishnev Yom Tov. Yeah. So we said that. So Rava told us that the reason why it's mentioned in the Megillah's Tainus is to tell us that both days are forbidden for both communities, right? For both locales. So for the Gemara, when do we say that the 14th and the 15th have the stringencies and the restrictions for both places only with regards to Hesped, that's eulogizing, and Tainus and fasting? Avo Malacha, but with regards to Malacha, Yom Echad V'Suloi, it's only one day, not both days. You're not allowed to do one work. It's only you're not allowed to do work, but that's only going to be on the 14th. Or if you're living in the walled cities, on the 15th. Hesped and Tainus is going to apply to both days, but not work. Right? The Gemara Aini, is this true? V'ha, there was a story, Mahar, of Rav Chazia Lahu Gabra, Dahavako Shadek Kisna Bepuraya. Rav saw a guy who was sowing flax on Purim, and he cursed him, and his flax didn't grow. So we see that here a guy was planting flax, and Rav cursed him. So obviously it's forbidden to do work. And for the Gemara, Hasan Bar Yemahama, no, the case that you're just quoting is a case where that was the day that person should not have been planting, because it was his day of celebrating Purim. Okay, so you can't use that as a proof. You cannot use that as a question, right, on what we tried to answer, to say that Malacha was only forbidden on one day and not on both days. But now the Gemara comes and tries to give us a different reason why it was permissible for Rebbe to plant on Purim. Rabba Berei, the Rava, the son of Rava, said, you could even say that he was planting it on his day, meaning on the 15th day itself, not on the day before. Why? Because although it says in the pasuk that this was to be established as Yemei Mishneh, V'Simcha, and Yom Tov, right? Nevertheless, not all of that was accepted by the community. The community accepted only part of it. Which part did they accept? Hesped v'Tainus kiblu alayu. The people accepted the restrictions with regards to eulogy and to fasting. That's what they accepted upon themselves. But Malacha lekiblu alayu, because Abbat, with regards to the restrictions against work, they didn't accept upon themselves. And here's a proof from the pasuk: the meikara ksiv, to begin with, before they accepted upon themselves all the things that were written and decreed about Purim. It says Simcha u'Mishneh v'Yom Tov, right? It mentions all of these things. Simcha, which refers to not doing eulogies. Mishneh, not fasting because you're going to eat. And Yom Tov means no malacha, but afterwards, when it talks about what they actually accepted, it says to make them Yemei Mishneh v'Simcha, days of feasting and gladness. But the term Yom Tov, which appeared before, doesn't appear when it is repeated, and that is because they didn't accept it upon themselves, and therefore there was no problem. There was no problem for Rebbe to do this planting on the 15th. Frank the Gemara, if that's the case, so now you've come along and said that the Jewish people never accepted upon themselves not to do any work on Purim. So if that's the case, Vela Rav, with the story about the flax guy that Rav saw sowing flax, my timer, Laitye, Lahu Gavra. Why did you curse the guy? Why did you curse him? If this is not something that the Jewish people accepted upon themselves, then he's perfectly permitted to sow flax. And for the Gemara, this Devarim Hamutarim V'acherim Nagu Ben Isa, because it was the case of things that are essentially permitted, but some treat them as forbidden, which means to say that although the formal acceptance of the day of Purim being also to do any malacha like Yom Tov was never accepted by the Jewish people, nevertheless, different communities have different norms that they accepted upon themselves, that they treated it as if it were forbidden. And so in the place where Rav lived, the custom was not to do any work and therefore not to plant any of this flax. And so Rav cursed him for violating the minig of that town, right? Al-Tifresh min HaTzibur. Don't separate yourself out from everybody else. If this is the established custom, then you are breaching that custom by going and planting, and that's why he cursed him. But the Rebbe, in the place where Rebbe lived, there was no such practice, there was no such custom to abstain from work, and therefore Rebbe would have been permitted to plant on Purim. So that's how we resolve it. The Iba is Ema. If you prefer, we could say another answer, that La'olam no, really in the place where Rebbe was, it was a practice not to do any malacha at all, not even planting. But Rebbe, what was Rebbe doing? He wasn't doing a netiyah stam, just any old planting. But Rebbe netiyah shel simcha nata, Rebbe was planting for the purposes of joy. In other words, he was doing something that was bringing pleasure and it was bringing joy. And that would have been permitted on Purim according to all customs. Now, how do we know that there's this distinction that we could speak about planting being one kind of planting and a planting of joy? Where do you get this idea that there's such a thing as a planting of joy? Because it's not. We've learned in another Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Titus that says that if what happened was they established a number of fasts and they still were not answered with rain, right? Over Elu v'Leinanu, if these fasts had passed and they were not answered with rain, so then the custom would be they must engage less in commerce, do less work. The binyan or netiyah, and they've got to restrict their construction and their planting, right? The erusin or benisuim, and they would also restrict the betrothals and the marriages, right? And all of these things they would do because they realized that the situation is very grave, that they still hadn't had rain and they've done all these fasts and it still hadn't rained. So therefore, they would make these extra restrictions to be able to focus more on their tshuva and returning to Hashem so that Hashem should send them rain. The Tana Allah. And the Tana taught in the Bryson with regards to this Mishnah that when it says that they restricted the building, binyan shel simcha. When we say construction, we mean the construction for the purpose of joy. Netiyah, when it says that they needed to restrict the planting, it doesn't mean all planting. It means netiyah shel simcha, the planting for the purposes of joy. And there the Brisa says, Eze binyan shel simcha, what would be an example of construction for the purposes of joy? So he says, Zeh haboyneh bayis chasnos libnoi. Somebody who builds a wedding residence for his son, which means to say that when they were getting married, the family of the chassan would build him a house, and in that house itself, they would have the chasana. So they said you should restrict and not build these wedding residences if it still hadn't rained after all the fasts had passed and no rain had yet come. What is going to be considered an example of planting for the purposes of joy? It's one who plants it's called over here royal arbor. It's a kind of tree that provides shade and it was a very interesting kind of tree, a leafy, shady recess formed by tree branches intertwined on a lattice work. That's what it says here in the art scroll. Anyway, whatever it was not an ordinary tree, and so that's considered to be an Atiyah Simcha. But what we learn from this brisa anyway is that there is a distinction between one type of planting and another type of planting, and there's something called the Atiyah Simcha. And we say with regards to doing any malacha on Purim, it wouldn't include doing a planting of Simcha, which Rebbe did on Purim. Okay? All right. I think.
Does he mean he's planting a tree when he says Natal Simcha?
Yes, he's planting a kind of a tree that was an atiyah, considered to be an atiyah simcha, a planting of joy. And since it was a planting of joy, so therefore it was permitted. Okay, Gufa. We're going to go back to the part of the Gemara where we mentioned that rabbis would celebrate in Tiberia on the 15th, even though Chizkiah had a doubt whether or not Tiberia was considered to be an Iyar, that was a city that was surrounded by walls at the times of Reb Shimon ben Nun. So Gufa, going back to this text itself of the early teaching, Chizkiah, Kori, Tiberia, we said that Chizkiah went and he read the Megillah on the 14th day and on the 15th day. Why? Because he was not sure whether it was surrounded by a wall in the days of Yeshua ben Nun or not. Frag the Gemara, was it really a doubt by Chizkiah about Tveria? There's a clear pasuk which seems to tell me that it was walled. Well, it says in the book of Yeshua, the fortress cities are, and it says Hatzidim, Tzer, Chamas, Rakas, Kineres. Right, all these cities were considered to be fortified, which means they were walled. But Kaimalan, we have established that Rakas Zutveria, the city that's mentioned in Yeshua called Rakas, that's Tveria. Therefore, if in the book of Yeshua itself it mentions Rakas, which is established as Tveria, how could Chizkiah have a doubt whether it's considered to be a city that was fortified and that was walled at the time of Yeshua? And the Gemara answers, hide the time of the Mesapkele. Here's the reason why Chizkiah wasn't sure. Mishum, because the Chad Nisa, one side, Shura Diyamahava, it was a wall of water, which means that you have Tiberia is on the Kinneret. And since it's on the Kinneret, even if Tiberia was actually walled at some point, it could have only been walled from three sides, because the fourth side is going to be on the Kinneret. And so therefore it's not walled. So therefore he wasn't sure whether or not, because it had one side of water, whether it could actually be classified as a wall and as a city that was walled in the time of Yeshua. And I think we'll stop here and we will pick up from here, Mr. Hashem, tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Same to you.
Rabbi, question.
Yes, sure.
The fellow who was planting and was cursed.
Yes.
Why can't we say that perhaps he was following a different shita, and that Rebbe should not have done it?
Rav should not have cursed him.
Right.
So there's a principle when it comes to certain things, that because we don't want to have machlekas, if there's a town where the prevailing custom is one way, then everybody has to follow that custom. So, for example, if people have a custom in a city to bring Shabbos in early, and it's not like today where there's 100 synagogues on one street, right? And everybody's got a different custom. We're talking about in those days where there was one synagogue, and Rav was the Marad Asra of his place. So if the custom was to have the minhag to bring in Shabbos early, there's no such thing as somebody saying, I'm not going to bring it in early. It becomes Shabbos for the whole city. Why? Because we don't want to have machlekas. And the same thing is with regards to the custom of not working on Erev Yom Tov. We had this when we discussed this a little bit. So the idea is there's no, we don't make this dispensation for somebody who may come from a place where they have a different custom and say, oh, he's following a different custom. If you're in the place of Rav, then you have to do according to the custom that Rav has established, or whoever it was that was established in that city. And it seems that in the place where Rav lived, this was accepted across the board, and this person was breaching that.
But in the Gemara, we find many times where somebody comes from a different place and someone, and he says, but this is the way we learned it at such and such a place.
That's true. And that's with regards to something where perhaps this is with regards to an individual. But when it comes to something that was accepted by a community, right, you cannot separate yourself from the community and do differently, because this would create a pirza, a breach, and other people would see and learn from him. And especially if Rav is seeing this, there's a principle that given the Shaske Rabbanon, if the rabbis are going to be quiet, it's going to be implied from that he hasn't said anything, that he's okay with it, and that would cause a weakening to the whole tradition. Therefore, he has to come along and he has to object to it.
So how can we then say minhag avotenu b'yadenu?
Minhag avotenu b'yadenu usually is when you have a rabbi from a different city coming in and being shocked at what he sees, and he asks them, what are you doing? Don't you know about this and that and the other? They can turn around and say, Minhag avotenu b'yadenu, and that would be a response to this visiting rabbi. But when you have an established custom in the community, we don't say Minhag avotenu b'yadenu. In other words, if you join a community, then you follow the rules of the community, when it comes to things that are b'fahesya.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Right.
All the best.